Across 5 decades of abduction research, one question has sat at the center of everything. Where are they from? Witnesses describe the beings with extraordinary consistency across cultures, across decades, across countries that have no cultural connection to each other. The large heads, the enormous dark almond-shaped eyes, the small and barely functional mouth, the gray skin, the slender body, the presence that communicates intelligence and complete indifference to human discomfort simultaneously. The gray being, the most consistently described non-human entity in the history of human experience, reported by thousands of independent witnesses across every continent, described with the same specific physical detail by a Kansas farmer, a Brazilian factory worker, a British housewife, and a Manhattan author who had no knowledge of each other and no cultural template that would have produced the same description independently. They are from somewhere. And across 50 years of independent testimony, regression research, astronomical analysis, and the convergence of evidence from sources that had no contact with each other, everything has pointed to the same place. A binary star system, 39 light-years from Earth, in the southern constellation of Reticulum, Zeta Reticuli. The story of how humanity first identified where the grays might come from begins not with a scientist or a researcher, but with a woman sitting at a kitchen table in New Hampshire, drawing a map she had seen on a wall inside a craft. Betty Hill and her husband Barney were the first widely documented abduction case in the modern era, taken from their car on a rural New Hampshire road in September 1961. Under hypnotic regression conducted by psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon, Betty described being shown a 3-dimensional star map aboard the craft by the being she identified as the leader. The map showed the locations of stars, connected by lines that the being told her represented trade routes and exploration paths. She was asked if she knew where Earth was on the map. She could not identify it. The being showed her. Earth was one of the outer stars on the map, not near the center of the network, but at its periphery. Under hypnosis, Betty reproduced the map she had been shown as accurately as she could from memory. The reproduction was a 2-dimensional approximation of a 3-dimensional display, but it retained the specific pattern of stars and the connecting lines that she had observed during her time aboard the craft. For years, the map was examined by astronomers and researchers who could not identify the star pattern it represented with any certainty. The catalog of known stars was extensive, and the 2-dimensional reproduction of a 3-dimensional display introduced distortions that made identification difficult. Then in 1968, an Ohio schoolteacher, an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish, began a project that would change the interpretation of the Betty Hill map permanently. Marjorie Fish was not a professional astronomer. She was a meticulous and methodologically serious amateur who had read Betty Hill's account of the star map and decided to approach the identification problem systematically rather than speculatively. She constructed 3-dimensional models of the local stellar neighborhood using data from the most current stellar catalogs available, positioning known stars in accurate 3-dimensional relationship to each other, and then examining the models from different angles to find a perspective from which the pattern of stars visible matched the pattern Betty Hill had drawn under hypnosis. The process took years. Fish examined thousands of possible orientations before finding a match. When she found it, the match was not approximate. It was precise. The star pattern Betty Hill had drawn under hypnosis, including the specific stars, their relative positions, and the connecting lines between them, matched a view of the local stellar neighborhood centered on 2 specific stars when seen from a specific angle in 3-dimensional space. Those 2 stars were Zeta Reticuli 1 and Zeta Reticuli 2, a binary star system located approximately 39.17 light-years from Earth in the southern constellation Reticulum. 2 sun-like stars orbiting each other at a distance of approximately 350 astronomical units, both of similar spectral type to Earth's own sun, both significantly older than our solar system at an estimated age of between 1 and 2 billion years older than the Sun. Fish's analysis was published in Astronomy magazine in December 1974. The response from the astronomical community was divided but serious. Several professional astronomers engaged with the analysis and found the match statistically significant. Others challenged the methodology and the significance of the match. The debate within the astronomical community has never been fully resolved. What has never been challenged is the basic fact that Barney Hill, under hypnosis in the early 1960s, drew a star pattern that a meticulous amateur astronomer subsequently matched to a real binary star system through a years-long systematic process using verified stellar catalog data. Barney Hill was not the last abduction witness to connect her experiences to the Zeta Reticuli system. As the abduction research literature grew across the 1970s and 1980s, under the investigative work of Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and John Mack, the pattern of witness descriptions of their abductors began to accumulate into something that researchers found increasingly difficult to account for through cultural contamination or the influence of prior media exposure alone. The physical description of the gray being remained stable across thousands of independent accounts. Large cranium, enormous dark wraparound eyes with no visible iris or pupil in most descriptions. Vestigial nasal structure, thin lipless mouth, gray or pale skin with a quality that witnesses consistently described as smooth and slightly translucent. Slender body with long arms and fingers disproportionate to the torso. Approximately 4 to 4.5 feet in height in most accounts. This description appeared in accounts from American abductees in the 1960s and 1970s. It appeared in accounts from Brazilian witnesses investigated independently by researchers who had no contact with the American abduction literature. It appeared in British accounts, in Australian accounts, in accounts from Japan, from South America, from Africa, from witnesses who had no cultural template for the specific combination of physical features they described, and no mechanism through which they could have accessed each other's testimony before producing their own. The convergence of independent physical descriptions toward the same highly specific entity type across culturally diverse witnesses separated by geography and time is one of the most significant patterns in the entire history of abduction research. It is a pattern that points not toward cultural contamination as its explanation, but toward a common external source. In 1975, Travis Walton was taken from a forest road in Arizona in front of 6 witnesses. Under regression and in conscious recollection, he described beings whose physical characteristics matched the gray description with a specificity that researchers found significant. He also described a second type of being, taller and more human in appearance, that appeared alongside the grays aboard the craft. In 1987, Whitley Strieber published Communion, his account of experiences with beings he described as the visitors. The physical description in Communion, particularly of the being whose face appeared on the book's cover, matched the gray description precisely and produced one of the most widely recognized images in the history of the contact phenomenon. Strieber's account brought the gray being into mainstream cultural consciousness in a way that no previous publication had achieved. But the researchers who had been documenting abduction cases since the 1960s noted something significant about the timing of Strieber's publication and the accounts they were examining. The gray description had been appearing consistently in the regression transcripts of abduction witnesses for 2 decades before Communion was published. The cultural familiarity with the gray being that Strieber's book created came after, not before. The pattern had already been established across thousands of independent accounts. The cultural influence argument, the suggestion that abduction witnesses were simply producing descriptions shaped by science fiction and popular culture, ran directly into the chronological problem that the regression data created. Witnesses in the 1960s and early 1970s were describing gray beings in specific detail before the gray being had become a culturally familiar image. The Zeta Reticuli system, has specific astronomical characteristics that researchers examining the abduction phenomenon have found significant in the context of the contact literature. The two stars of the Zeta Reticuli system are both G-type main sequence stars, similar in spectral type to Earth's Sun. They are between 1 and 2 billion years older than our solar system. If planets formed around either or both of the Zeta Reticuli stars, and if life developed on any of those planets on a timeline comparable to life's development on Earth, the civilization that resulted would be between 1 and 2 billion years older than human civilization. 1 billion years of additional development, of additional biological evolution, of additional technological and cultural advancement. The physical characteristics that distinguish the gray being from human beings, the enlarged cranium, the enormous eyes adapted perhaps to different light conditions, the atrophied physical features suggesting a shift toward technological rather than physical capability over millennia, are consistent with what evolutionary biologists might expect from a species that had been developing for 1 billion years longer than humanity. This is not proof of anything. It is a framework, a way of reading the physical description that the beings themselves have provided through the bodies that thousands of independent witnesses have described with such extraordinary consistency. But it is a framework that fits. That produces a coherent picture when the physical evidence, the stellar identification, the evolutionary timeline, and the accumulated testimony of thousands of witnesses across 50 years are examined together. The question of whether the gray beings are from Zeta Reticuli has not been answered definitively by anyone. The Marjorie Fish star map analysis remains contested. The abduction testimony that converges toward the same physical description remains unexplained by conventional psychology. The stellar characteristics of the Zeta Reticuli system remain consistent with the theoretical requirements of a civilization old enough to have achieved interstellar travel. What has been established across 50 years of abduction research is the pattern. Thousands of independent witnesses, the same physical description, a star map drawn under hypnosis that matches a real binary star system 39 light years away. A star system old enough to have produced a civilization 1 billion years more advanced than our own. Everything points to the same place. Whether humanity is ready to look in that direction is a different question entirely. You have just heard one of the most evidentially significant cases ever assembled in this field. If this raised questions you are not ready to put down, subscribe, because we document cases exactly like this every single week. Tell us in the comments where you land on Zeta Reticuli, the Barney Hill star map, the Marjorie Fish analysis, the billion-year civilization, the detail that you cannot explain away. We want to hear it.